Hey guys, it's Tom from Media, and I want to show you how to do some white balance bracketing in Lightroom to get more accurate white balance in mixed lighting situations. I have two examples I'm going to show you. This one photo right here, which has three different rooms, each one with slightly different white balance, and then this other one, which is going to be a little more difficult, mixed lighting coming in from the window, a little bit of yellow in the middle, and then a little green in the back from the fluorescent. Have these HDR'd using Lightroom HDR, did some basic corrections. Going to do some fine tuning later, but let's do the white balance first. The way people would normally do this is they would go in here, adjust the white balance for the main room, and then they could do a few different things. So by correcting in here, this room was already very blue and it wound up being even more blue. So one thing you might do is come in here and just turn down the blue slider. And that obviously gets rid of the blue cast, but also gets rid of all the colors too, especially this nice blue wall in the back. So that's not the ideal solution. The other way is doing something similar in Photoshop. So another option we could do is we could do it in Lightroom. We could mask this area out. We could go into the tools area, create a brush mask, and then we'll come in here, just increase the flow and the opacity, and just paint in this whole room. And then come in and then change to the erase tool. And then erase all the areas we don't want. Oops. So I'm just clicking on one point and then shift clicking on the other point to get a nice clean line. Okay, I'm going to change my flow and the feather. Okay, so now if we just came in here and changed the temperature by just the color and we made this more white, that works. But what we're losing here is the ability to use the color picker. So we could always just hover over an area and get the RGB values up here. Maybe zoom in over someplace that's supposed to be white. Go into our temperature and then just make adjustments until our white balance is more even. But that takes a little longer. And then if you're working at different times of the day with different lighting, it could affect what you're doing. So instead, what I like to do is do white balance bracketing by creating 3 virtual copies. So we could do this in Photoshop too, but we would have to make 3 actual copies of our raw or HDR file, which takes up a lot of disk space. If we do it in Lightroom, it just creates a virtual copy. It references back to the original file. So we have 3 copies of the adjustments, which don't take a lot of room on disk, and then 1 copy of the large raw file, which does take a lot of room on the disk. If we right click on this and select create virtual copy, I'll create a new copy with our existing adjustments. And then if we do it one more time, we have 3 virtual copies that we can use for the different white balancing. So we already white balanced the front room. Now we can white balance the back room just by clicking on an area we want to be white or we know to be white. And you could fine tune it a little bit here, but that looks pretty good. And then we could go to the third room back here and find our white point. And over here, we are going to bring back the yellow a little bit just to get some of the incandescent light off. That looks pretty good. Maybe increase the tint just a little bit. There's a little bit of green coming from somewhere. So that looks pretty good. So we have pretty good white balance. But while we're doing this, we could also increase the exposure, brighten it up, increase the contrast just a little bit. Now it's going to blow out the front room, but we're not going to use the front room in there. So that looks pretty good. So now what we could do is select these 3 images and then go into edit, open as layers in Photoshop. And we'll do our masking in here because we have a little more control. Now the one unfortunate thing which could be a little confusing is that they're all named the same. So we don't know which one's which. We just have to go by which one looks like what. So I'm going to bring them down so that they're in order from front to back room. First, I'm going to create a negative mask by clicking on the Add Layer mask while holding down the Alt key on my keyboard. And that's just going to create a black mask over this first one. We have the other one turned off. And I'm just going to mask around this doorway. And if it was a different shape, you could use the curve tool, but this is just straight line, so I'm using the polygonal lasso. And then I'm just going to create some area down here. Switch to my brush tool, turn it on 100% opacity. And I'm just going to paint in white right here. And I have a soft brush so that it feathers on the bottom. So it's a little cleaner looking. So we don't have a harsh transition. Maybe there's just a little too much there. So just back it off a little bit. And if we turn that off, we can see we have a nice white balanced room in the back. And now we could do the same here. Create a negative mask. Use the lasso tool. Go to our brush and paint in white. So if we group these together, turn them on and off, our white balance is much more accurate now. I just find it's an easier way to do it this way, and it winds up being a little more accurate and doesn't take too much more time. So now we could flatten our image, save disk space, and save it, go back into Lightroom. And then we have our new image in here, and we can compare it with the two. And I mean, it may not seem like a huge difference to some people, but I think it's the little things that make photos stand out. Now, this next one is a little trickier. We have 3 different light sources. The blue light coming in, the yellow light from these incandescents, and then this fluorescent light here. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create 3 virtual copies. Okay. It's nice we have white doors, so I'm going to do this back room first. Make some adjustments. Come in here. Do you want to select something a little off the main hotspot just so that it's a little bit warmer? And over here in the middle one, I am going to come in and reduce the blue saturation. And then I'm going to do that here too. Just to get the blue off the refrigerator, right? And then we have our blue light here. All right, so let's open these as layers in Photoshop. Rearrange everything. Okay, so first we're going to want to paint in our middle layers, and that's going to be the yellow. Let's create that negative mask first by first doing Alt and click on Layer Mask. Let's go to our blue channel, Control click on that, and then Control I to inverse it. That should select the yellow tones. Okay, this is cleaning up the yellows in here now. Oops. Don't want to do too much on the floor because the floor has some yellow in it as well. We don't need to get rid of all the yellow. I mean, it does make it look a little interesting to have a little bit of color cast in there. And the base layer is the blue corrected layer, so that looks okay. So let's look at that. That looks pretty good. let me just remove some of it from the floor, or just come in and bounce out the floor just a little bit more. Okay, now let's do this back area over here. Let's create the negative mask. Alt click on the add layer mask, and now let's make our selection using the lasso tool. And if you're more comfortable using curves or some other method of making the selection, use whatever you're comfortable with. So let's grab our brush, 22 flow, 100% opacity. Just gonna paint this in completely. And it's a little too blue here, so let me come down to 20% and just paint back this area a little bit. Too much. Go to 50% and paint this in. Over here, we could just pile it on really thick and feather it off on the door. Come back in there and delete it a little bit. Getting a little too much blue on this wall over here. Looks pretty good. And if I had a little more time, I could fine tune it a little bit more, but that's not bad. Let's group that together. And we have a nicely white balanced scene, and we haven't really messed with the colors too much, where if we, with some of the other methods, we would have unnatural colors for the cabinets, let's say, or the paint colors. So this is the way I like to do it most of the time. So let's flatten our image. Now save and close it and bring it back into Lightroom. And let's look our before and after. So this is the uncorrected image, and then this is our white balanced image. And if we just, like I said, if we just did white balance here and then remove the blues, we get really messed up looking floors. So if we don't take it out too much. So this is like the cheater way of doing it, and then this is the nicer way of doing it. The floor looks nicer, beams look nicer. So I hope you like this. If you did, give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see some other editing techniques in Photoshop, feel free to leave a comment.